Good morning. I'm Jason Henderson. I'm head of Markets and Security Services for HSBC in North America. I'm also the executive sponsor for our Pride Network of Employee Resource Group here in the United States. I'm very excited to be opening today's session. HSBC has been a committed sponsor for Out and Equal for the past 8 years. Your theme today covers the future of work. This has been a much debated discussion over the past 18 months. How can we be apart and together at the same time? At HSBC, our global reach has always been our unique strength. Bringing diverse people, ideas, and perspectives help us open up a world of opportunity for a more inclusive world. We aspire to be a place where everybody can be their authentic selves and bring their whole selves to work, no matter where that work takes place. We remove barriers, innovate, and create opportunities for people to grow and succeed, both at our firm and the communities that we serve. In your sessions today, I hope your discussions challenge the past and create space for full inclusion in a future that must adapt to the needs of a rapidly changing world. Thanks for tackling such an important topic and enjoy the sessions today.
When we engage in global conversations, we know that no singular region of the world can be painted with one brush. The Asia-Pacific region is full of unique and distinct sociocultural traditions and government models. At the same time, the economic and business constructs that connect these countries can unify many multinationals' efforts around LGBTQ inclusion and broader DEI efforts. In this session, Dina Fidas, our Managing Director and Chief Program and Partnerships Officer, will be in conversation with Fern Nye, former CEO of Community Business and seasoned leader and changemaker with experience successfully leading major DEI strategies throughout Asia. We'll also hear from other key business leaders from the region on perspectives on opportunities for collaboration across countries toward a shared vision of the future of work.
Welcome, Fern. It's an absolute pleasure to have you at the 2021 Out and Equal Summit.
Thank you so much, Dina. It's great to be here.
So Fern, I think so many of us know your body of work and your leadership role at Community Business, but I'm hoping you can actually tell us a bit more about what brought you to Hong Kong and how did your career there begin?
First of all, Dina and the rest of the Out and Equal team, congratulations on this year's summit. I understand that you've been holding the summit now for over 2 decades, and that is a huge achievement. I'm actually originally from Canada. I always wanted to work in Hong Kong. So we moved here from Canada back in 1987. I realized many of you had not even been born in the 80s. So I'm giving away my age. And we expected to just come here for a few years to try it out. And now we've been here for over 34 years. So Hong Kong tends to grow on you. I started off my career as a techie, i.e. a software engineer. And after landing in Hong Kong, I started working in the banking industry. So in 2005, Standard Chartered was starting its diversity and inclusion journey globally. And I was asked to take on the role of the very first D&I champion for Hong Kong, of course, in addition to my day job. And I really didn't have much of a clue what it was about, but it did seem to resonate with my personal values. So we established a council, we started to build momentum around gender, later expanding our focus to other areas like disability, LGBT+, and so on. And it was around that time when Standard Chartered started to work with Community Business as a member of its Diversity and Inclusion in Asia network, Diane. And I remember being very inspired by what Community Business was doing. The fact that this tiny NGO was conducting groundbreaking research, taking on sensitive subjects head on, advising big corporates how they could be doing better and how they could be influential forces for good. So it was really great learning for me and a way for me to discover what I was passionate about. And eventually Community Business approached me for the role of CEO, and I joined in 2012.
Well, and for those of us working in the global movement for LGBTQ plus and other DEI initiatives around the world, we're so thankful that they offered you that job and that you accepted it. You have an absolutely singular profile in terms of your influence, your drive, and the effect you've had on the community across the Asia Pacific region. And so truly from my heart, you've been an inspiration.
So no, thank you so much for your kind words. It's been a real privilege for me to be doing this kind of work now for the last like almost 20 years.
So Fern, we actually first met when you were actually launching the Community Business Index, and I was working on the HRC Corporate Equality Index. Now, at that time, we had the US-based CEI, we had the Stonewall UK Index, the Australian Index had also begun. What made you decide that this was a tool that the region needed to move the needle on DEI efforts and LGBTQ inclusion specifically?
Well, when I joined community business, we were already working on a series of employer guides on how to create inclusive workplaces for LGBT plus employees for Hong Kong, China, and India. And the organization already had an aspiration of creating an index at some point in the future. So being a former banker and IT person, I love the idea of an index as a credible, robust, and objective benchmarking tool that could also motivate companies by creating a sense of competition. So back in 2014, when we met, community business was extremely lucky to learn from the other organizations internationally with their already established indices. These organizations were pioneers leading the way, and we were very grateful for their help and advice when we started our own Hong Kong index. And I'm really proud that we did all this work at a time when, I mean, even now, Hong Kong is a fairly conservative place. And even though it has a reputation for being a modern cosmopolitan city, I think we were slightly ahead of our time. We spent a lot of time engaging companies. We just sort of brought people and companies with us along the way.
I'm curious about the localization of an index and how was it initially received?
Well, I think companies, multinationals, were already participating in these other indices. So it wasn't as if it was brand new for some of them. But I think for me, it's really important to have a local index because organizations, companies, and people operate within their local legal, cultural, social, and political context. So you need to be, looking at all these various parameters from a local context. So, but other companies were very early in their D&I journey. So it was a spectrum. There were some companies that were very advanced and some companies that were in the very initial stages. And one of the things that we did was enable companies to join anonymously if they were a bit shy or didn't feel ready to be publicly ranked, which I think was a genius idea. And even today, I know, and I keep in touch with the team, it does require a lot of ongoing engagement with the corporate sector.
It absolutely does. So Fern, when you were talking about the trajectory of your career, in some ways it's a familiar narrative in that you saw the implications and the need to combine gender, disability, LGBTQ plus efforts across the initiatives within the private sector. So Fern, in thinking about how we do this work in the region, I'm struck by two fairly entrenched and distinct reactions. The first set of companies and leaders that really insist to do LGBTQ plus work, it must be couched within broader DEI efforts that include gender, disability, ethnic diversity, and more. And On the other hand, there's really a growing camp, particularly driven by younger people, I'm noticing, that insist we need to have distinct LGBTQ programming, and that we're actually doing a disservice to the community and its unique needs when we continually combine them. I'm curious how you've navigated this and what strategies you've employed.
I really think it depends on the company, what their business priorities are, at what stage they are in their diversity inclusion journey, and what approach works for them. I mean, with some companies, the business driver it was triggered by an incident in their workplace. In many cases, it's a global effort, or it's being driven by head office. So we've really seen many different approaches that companies take. But no matter what approach they do take, you do need leadership, commitment, and accountability. You need to have a strategy and a roadmap, policies, communication, training, measurements, and so on. And in the early days, I remember all corporates had a focus on gender and women. And then they began to broaden their focus to other areas of diversity, such as disability, race, religion, generation, sexual orientation, and so on. And within the LGBT plus space, there was initially much more understanding of the L and the G, and this was later expanded to encompass BTQ and so on. Mm-hmm. And today you see companies, especially the multinationals, taking much more of a multifaceted, integrated approach, tackling issues with an intersectional lens and addressing the concerns of a wider spectrum of their workforce, not just the most privileged within their disadvantaged or minority group. And we also see employee well-being and mental health becoming more of a prominent focus, especially during the pandemic, which has really disrupted the way we work and interact with each other. We've also seen companies extending their efforts beyond the workplace into the marketplace, gaining a better understanding of the diversity of their customer base and ensuring that every customer touch point is an inclusive experience. So, the great thing nowadays for companies that are just starting on their journey, they have access to so many resources and people, and they can learn and really fast track their progress. So we've seen, many different things, and no matter how, companies do it, I think it's better to have a more comprehensive, diverse approach. If you just focus on one area, be it LGBT or women, there are, you've got, you want to engage most of your workforce. You don't want to just engage a certain, percentage. So employees, these topics, these focus areas will resonate differently with, different parts of your workforce or the individuals in your company.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you raised the fact that so many in the private sector have been working on gender equality, gender parity for a decade and decades, plural. This is deliberately provocative, but I'm going to ask it. Have we arrived when it comes to women in leadership across the private sector in Asia? And if not, will we arrive? You're a parent, I'm a parent. Will we arrive within our children's generations? What is the state of women in the workplace right now where you are?
We definitely have not arrived. I think there's been progress made in various areas. There is definitely more awareness. But if you look at what's happening around the world, you hear of so many issues around sexual harassment in the workplace. You look at statistics like women on boards. It's appalling in Hong Kong. I think it's still less than 14%. This is an area that community business has been tracking for a long time. And, the gains have been marginal. And so, there's still a glass ceiling. The old boys club is still live and kicking. There's a lot of work to be done. And for every company, they need to, pick and choose and understand what are the issues they want to address, and they need to have concerted effort. Race is another area that reared its head, last year, with George Floyd's murder, and it really raised a huge consciousness, and even people in Asia saying, well, wow, we didn't realize that, it seems like there's so much needed to be done. And it was very, very, it was very heart-wrenching, but we do need, to reflect, I think, as individuals on ourselves, on what our companies are doing, and see how, it's a big world, there's so many issues, and to prioritize and track progress. And as companies, we know that companies are very influential. I believe that they need to be out there showing their leadership on issues like this. There's internal accountability, but there's also many things that they could do to drive progress externally in the wider community.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you raise George Floyd, and that, being located in Hong Kong, certainly you are witness to a variety of political and civil unrest. What was it like to be watching the United States over this last year and a half?
Well, it's been mortifying to me to really understand, such systemic racism, in today's modern world, to see that, this is playing out every day. And so, no, I think it was shocking for many people, but, even so, we also have to reflect on ourselves and open our own eyes around social injustices here and, in the rest of Asia as well. There's no place that's, doing everything well. But, and we do need to really be aware. We need to learn from each other, but it does take people working together. It's you can say, oh, okay, well, that's something that's happening thousands of miles away, not here. But yeah, that, you do need to look at yourselves and work on these very, very difficult issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it can be the distinction between, are we looking, through a screen or through a window at someone else's problem, or are we holding a mirror up to ourselves? And often they, there's an interplay between the two. I want to shift gears a little bit, because as we head into this next panel, on the Out and Equal staff, we have some self-consciousness about it. And the self-consciousness is that we are having a panel to talk about the challenges, the opportunities in what amounts to an incredibly diverse, vast region of the world, with countries that have wholly unique histories from one another, wholly unique languages from one another, even forms of government and economic drivers. And yet we so quickly talk about the Asia Pacific region as if it's one. There's also the practical reality that for multinationals, they're looking for regional ideas and the regional applications of their policies. If you're a multinational right now, you're not looking for unique DEI practices country by country. You're looking to consolidate, and you're looking for commonality. These are potentially at odds. And I'm wondering how you have navigated sort of an APAC identity and an Asian identity in the work, while also preserving that respect for what is local and what is going to be unique. That marching into an office in Shanghai and invoking something happening in Tokyo may or may not win you friends and influence. So, how have you navigated that in your leadership roles?
I would say, it's been very challenging. Community businesses' focus and strengths have always been related to the APAC region. And when we talk about Asia, we have focused on the major economies like China, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, Japan, Malaysia. But we know that the region is much more than those economies. Many times our work revolved around using an Asian lens to unpack a particular issue, such as talent development or women in leadership. Mm-hmm. And from our research in many markets in Asia, D&I is often seen as a Western concept, sometimes at odds with Asian cultural norms and the traditional corporate head office driven or even regionally driven approach may not resonate locally. So I really think it's important to understand and appreciate the cultural context in the different markets in Asia, mm-hmm. Exploring the various dynamics and nuances, challenging Western biases, and to adapt your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and approach accordingly. So to demonstrate what I mean, maybe if we have a few examples. The concept of diversity with its focus on individuality can sometimes clash with some Asian cultures, such as the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese cultures, which value collectivism and group orientation. Mm-hmm. And pursuing an individual's point of view could be seen as disrespectful, selfish, or disruptive to the functioning of a group. And the focus on differences or different perspectives can also be challenging for Asian cultures, which highly value harmony and fitting in. Another example is the discussion around the topic of mental health, which has long been considered taboo in Asia. And there are many barriers to accessing to people seeking help, including accessibility to healthcare professionals and services, which differ greatly across the Asian markets. So if companies really want to embed DE&I as a core business strategy in Asia, they really do need to invest the time to engage with key stakeholders that are on the ground and to examine issues and concepts from a local perspective. And I would really encourage people to refer to Community Business's body of Asian DE&I research, including their very recently published report on LGBT plus mental health in the workplace in Asia.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And we are proud partners of Community Business and do see how much the research coming out of Community Business can enrich those efforts. So thank you. So Fern, you have seen tremendous change across the private sector and across the society there. What has that meant for LGBTQ inclusion in Hong Kong and beyond? Across the region, I mean.
Yeah, so I think today, compared to maybe 15 years ago, the topic of LGBT plus is much more of a mainstream topic. People talk about it. They're much more aware of and understand some of the nuances around LGBT, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's good. I mean, I feel that in the work that I've done, this wasn't a movement of any kind. It was really about changing hearts and minds of individuals and companies one at a time. I always relish the opportunity when a CEO or somebody senior would say to me, what does someone's sexual orientation have anything to do with their work? We just care about them being able to do their job. And we run a meritocracy here. So, really, is this a real issue? And to me, that was great because they would ask the question. They were genuinely interested And it would open the door for me to do a brief LGBT plus 101 session with them and talk about, why it's important to their business, give them examples of how discrimination or unconscious bias could occur, and help them understand that they do need to take intentional steps to create an inclusive workplace. So I think the conversation has moved on, but there's still tremendous amount of work to be done.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't help but also note the changes that have occurred in Hong Kong. How are you feeling? What are you observing? And what's giving you some, anxiety right now being in Hong Kong?
Well, Hong Kong has been undergoing significant political and social change, especially in the last few years. And like everywhere else, we're dealing with the challenges of the pandemic. I find it very disheartening to see people and some companies deciding to leave Hong Kong due to these changes. I read recently that there's been a net outflow of around 90,000 people just in the last year. And although maybe not all of them are immigrants or people leaving Hong Kong for good, recent surveys show that a significant percentage of people are either planning to leave, to immigrate, or they would if they had the opportunity. So I think Hong Kong will be going through a brain drain. And Hong Kong's had waves of immigration in the past. And what's happened is that eventually some of the people do come back. With respect to the LGBT plus community in Hong Kong, the path to equality has always been difficult in terms of advancement of rights and protection against discrimination. Whatever progress has been made has usually been through the courts rather than through legislation. And in the current political climate, the landscape for LGBT plus advocacy, I think, has become much more uncertain. The legislators who had voiced support for LGBT plus issues in the past are no longer in power. And some civil society groups feel that some of the avenues for expression are being curtailed or restricted. However, on a more positive note, recent research tells us that public attitudes are shifting. There's much more of an acceptance of the LGBT plus community, especially amongst young people. Next year, the Gay Games will be held in Hong Kong, subject to COVID, of course. And the Games will be a fantastic opportunity to promote inclusion in Hong Kong and across Asia. And there will be tremendous business and employment opportunities within the Greater Bay Area. So that's a massive area encompassing Hong Kong, Macau, and Guangdong, made up of 9 cities, huge cities, and 2 special administrative regions, with a total population of close to 86 million people and a GDP of 1.7 billion US dollars. So while Hong Kong is transforming, it's still an important global financial center and transportation hub. And Hong Kong will play a key role in the development of this Greater Bay Area. Hong Kong people are resilient, adaptable, entrepreneurial, and extremely hardworking. And I'm confident that even with all the changes, Hong Kong will still be here, carving out a unique space within China and the rest of the world. So in summary, Hong Kong will continue to be my home, and I choose to remain hopeful.
Thank you so much, Fern.
So hello everybody, my name is Alexis, and huge honor for me to be here today to moderate this session. My previous experience was being a diversity and talent manager based in Shanghai for multinational companies here. Today, this panel, we have invited 4 great speakers from 4 countries in APAC to discuss on the topic on working for change across this region and identify our common goals together. So today, just giving a little introduction to what's happening in APAC. I mean, in 2020 and 2021, we have witnessed huge waves of change, globally speaking, in the context of pandemic, and Asia Pacific region is no exception. And we are seeing many new multinational companies hiring full-time DEI professionals in this region, as well as launching many new practices this region has never seen before in the corporate context. So today we want to discuss a little bit more about what are happening in each country from the panelists we have invited today, where they locate, and discuss whether there are opportunities for collaboration, as well as what kind of in-country specific dynamics are happening at play that could be interesting for us to have mutual learnings about. So let's give a very quick time for each panelist to introduce themselves. 1 minute for each person. How about we can start from Justine?
Okay, hello. Thank you, Alexis, and hi everyone on the panel. My name is Justine. My pronouns are she and they. I currently work in Shanghai, China at the Nike Greater China headquarters. And my role is within consumer marketing as the 365 Experience Assistant Manager. And it's a mouthful. And I've been in LGBTQIA+ community building for about 10 years now. And around 2 years ago, I also started China's first LGBTQ-oriented running community called Queer Run Crew. I'm very happy and very honored to be here. Thank you.
Hello, Justine. Thank you so much. And maybe we can give the microphone to Chris.
Hi, good morning. This is Chris Eugenio, calling in from Manila, Philippines. I am a board of trustee at the Philippine Financial and Inter-Industry Pride, or PFIP. We are the leading voice and champion for LGBT+ inclusion in the Philippines. I am both an industry and advocacy leader, and as a nonprofit organization, our goal is to provide limitless career options for Filipino LGBT professionals. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. And Geraldine?
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. So yes, I'm Geraldine, based in Singapore. I'm from Oracle. So I've been in Oracle for about 4.5 years, and my experience in Oracle has been surrounding employee experience, actually, particularly onboarding, gamified learning, well-being, as well as taking the lead as the ERG chapter leader of Pride Singapore.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And finally, Alexander.
Hi, you guys. Good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. I'm Alexander from Tokyo. I'm a lawyer by day, but also do non-for-profit work in all potential other parts of the day. I co-chair LAN, Lawyers for LGBT and Allies Network. That is one of most prominent organizations here in Japan, fighting for marriage equality and LGBT rights. Happy to be here with you and look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Got it. Oh, by the way, just 10 seconds, but can you guys tell me your pronouns, preferred pronouns as well for the following discussion?
He and him.
And Justine,
She,
Geraldine,
her.
and Chris?
Yeah.
She, her.
He and him.
She and they, actually.
She and they, okay. So thank you everyone for giving us a quick self-introduction. And let's move straight into the really exciting questions that we have for you today. So the first question is more about the fundamentals of this topic. This is for everybody. So in the last 12 months, what has been the biggest barrier to LGBTQ plus equality where you live? So for our global audience, what type of progress is happening that others may not be aware of? So perhaps you can give us a little bit more info about where you currently locate. So then it's easier for the global audience to understand where you're located and the context where you're in about this question. Anyone can raise your hand to start first. So I see Alexander is smiling, so that you seem very ready. So how about let's give the microphone to Alexander first.
Thank you. I'm calling from Japan today, and unfortunately, Japan doesn't have any LGBT rights protections or other policies on the federal level. It's been a hope for the community here in Japan that the Olympics and Paralympics may change that. There was a big push by the community, advocates, allies, corporates, and many others to at least get the anti-discrimination law passed again right before the Olympics. The hopes were crushed, unfortunately, because there was no consensus within the governing coalition to pass such measure. Many people did support us, but there were quite a few people who couldn't. And in Japan, we tend to aim to achieve consensus. So we hope it will be achieved soon. Besides the anti-discrimination, the obvious target of the community is marriage equality. There again, we don't have marriage equality yet in Japan, but I wanted to mention 3 achievements which have been quite an inspiring story for the last 12 months. First and foremost, we had a wonderful ruling from Sapporo in northern Japan, where the judge wrote that denying same-sex couples right to marry is against the equality provisions in the constitution. The judgment doesn't take effect right away. It will take some time. It ultimately will require legislation on the federal level to pass the law and make some changes. But it's a big major step. As you can imagine, it's not typical for Japan. As a lawyer, I can tell you, it's not typical for Japanese courts to pronounce something unconstitutional. So very big inspiration for the community here. Secondly, again, on the same-sex marriage issue, while federal government has been really absent in supporting us as a community here, many municipalities and prefectures have actually adopted partnership ordinances. As of today, 110 ordinances have been passed. While they don't have the actual rights along with them, you can still register a partnership in the local municipality. As you can imagine, it's phenomenally optically important that Japan is moving in the right direction, that the municipality is taking initiative to support equality for LGBT couples. And lastly, another key player in this is corporate world. We all know that the voice of corporates is important, is valuable, and it's been a pleasure and honor to work with many corporates here in Japan to introduce and to really roll out the viewpoint on marriage equality. The viewpoint on marriage equality was adopted 3 years ago on the platform of ACCJ, the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. We at LAN worked closely to ensure it's passed. It was adopted. And what I really want to share with you today, that 125 corporates have endorsed the viewpoint of marriage equality. Why this is important? It's because the voice of corporates will be heard by the government, because many of those corporates are major Japanese corporates like Panasonic, SoftBank, and LIXIL and many others, as well as many multinationals. And we'll talk later today, I'm sure, how the multinationals can actually have a voice across the Asia Pacific. Yeah, and if they take a stance here in Tokyo to support marriage equality, we hope to expect them to do the same thing elsewhere. So with that, I think we are hopeful. Japan, unfortunately, is moving in a slow pace, but again, we are hoping that many more people will join the equality train, and that while it's not a Shinkansen, fast-moving Japanese train, we hope to get to the destination of equality very soon with your support. Thank you. Arigato.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. I've just learned so much about Japan, like in your brief sharing just now, and I felt very impressed by the corporates coming together and allying to make a bigger voice, make a bigger stand together, even influencing perhaps a bigger policy potentially to move. So that we definitely are cheering for Japan and hoping for marriage equality to come to this country very soon.
Thank you.
So let's give a microphone to Geraldine. How about Geraldine? You can share with us a little bit more about what's happening in Singapore and your observation on this.
Yes, absolutely happy to. So as Alexis, you've mentioned, I'm based in Singapore. And I would say in the last 12 months, just like Japan, we haven't progressed much on a legislative point of view, such as there's no marriage equality, there's no explicit protection against the LGBT community in the workplace. 377A still stands, whereby it's illegal for two male to have basically any sexual activities. And also, I think in the recent 12 months, we also had a controversial incident whereby the media portrayed a very negative impression of the community as well. So just for everyone's knowledge, in Singapore, it is not appropriate to promote the homosexual lifestyle on media, basically, whether it's radio or on television. So that means if you want to portray any sort of LGBTQ personas, it will probably be a neutral or a negative stance. So there was a bit of a hoo-ha recently on that issue. But despite not much progress on the legislative and practices in the media, I would say there's quite a bit of progress on the societal level, whereby we have alternative media to talk about sensitive issues such as this, as well as our favorite Netflix that everybody binge watched lots of series during the lockdown period as well. And I think my personal view is that I think the government probably want it to be an organic process rather than a forced one. I think we've seen some countries whereby even though it's recognized, the community, equality of marriage, it's recognized, but on the societal level, on the day-to-day experience for the community, they still face discrimination. So I suspect that the government want to do it in an organic manner, whereby when everyone is ready, everyone is aware on the same level or similar levels, then maybe the laws can come in. So that is my personal observation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine, to let us understand a little bit more about what's happening in Singapore. Yeah, I think, I think when I heard about you saying to wait until everybody's will be ready, it's a little bit triggering for me myself as a queer person, because we might not have a day when everybody is ready, and hopefully that wouldn't be the reason to let progress continue. But still, there's conversation to have and consensus sometimes to push for, right, for a big change. So thank you so much for sharing with us about this region. So next, let's hand the microphone to Chris to understand a little bit more about what's happening in the Philippines.
Thank you, Alexis. And I can definitely relate. I think for a lot of the work that we're doing, we're hoping that, we live to actually see the fruits of our labor, so to speak. But to me, especially here in the Philippines, it feels a lot as if like our task for today is just take out the weeds and to pave the way for the next generation. I share the same sentiments that Alexis and Geraldine have shared. It's the same situation in the Philippines when it comes to marriage equality. Our national anti-discrimination bill has been languishing in our legislative bodies for 2 decades now. So we don't even have the most basic protections, for LGBT folks in the Philippines. And a lot of the inequities and inequalities that we've experienced pre-pandemic have just been amplified, mainly because we don't have these protections. For example, many members of the LGBT communities were displaced, during the pandemic, because especially those who are working in the media, entertainment, tourism, industries, and because the government don't recognize many of them in many different ways, so they don't get subsidies, they don't get the support, but it's not so dire. during this time, I've also observed a lot of like coalescing and joining forces among advocates and activists and support from the corporates and even the civil society at large. I think that's a silver lining in all of this, and because we're all online, we were all able to reach out to one another. Like for example, for PFIP, we're mostly concentrated in Metro Manila, but because of the pandemic, because we're all on social media, we're all on different virtual platforms, we're able to connect with other LGBT plus groups across the country, and that's fantastic. And this is important, not only because again we're going through the pandemic, but also because 2022 is the Philippine national elections, and so we have a lot of work to do in terms of like getting everybody like rallying under with the same battle cry, and really kind of like having a clear marching order for all the LGBT plus advocates and supporters and allies here in the Philippines. So it's not the best of times, but we're seeing glimmers of hope. And we are carefully watching our Asian neighbors for sure, for inspiration and really for motivation. Like we are definitely inspired and encouraged by all the other movements that are happening across Asia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, for your super insightful sharing about what's happening in the Philippines. So let's give the microphone last to Justine on this question.
Thank you, Alexis. In China, I'd say the situation has been quite consistent throughout. There's just a very expected amount of pressure from the authority, especially around media censorship and advocacy and community efforts. And there's still a considerable amount of scrutiny and censorship in what we can and cannot communicate, what we can and cannot do. And this is both at a corporate and community grassroots level. We always want to try to stay a bit under the radar. And especially for Nike, this gigantic foreign company, we've definitely had to tiptoe around a lot to just stay aligned politically with the authority, the party's agenda. And from a community perspective, this translates to keeping things a bit more innocent and less provocative. So rallying under a cause to promote a kind of legal change would be very sensitive, so to speak. So, but this is not to say that we are playing Sisyphus and there hasn't been any progress. I think considering that the global situation, the pandemic, like many places are still in full lockdown or on their way back to normalcy, whereas China has returned to normal a long, long time ago. So we are no longer operating under this crisis mode anymore. We're fortunate enough to be back on our feet a lot earlier than everybody else. And so I see that actually many international companies, Nike included, are shifting gear to elevate their D&I efforts in China and the APAC region, which is very inspiring and one of the silver lining in the situation. So there's been more and more events at a local and grassroots level. I think, with a action, there is a reaction, right? So while there has been censorship on the media, but we're seeing more and more younger people and more creators and more advocates that are advocating for the cause. So things are looking good, I would say. Very optimistic to where things are going.
Thank you, Justine. Yes. Yeah, because I'm also located in Shanghai, so definitely feel you and understand every word that you say about what's happening in the community here. And just adding, I think something that I learned from you from actually the other panel, Pride and Resilience that we did together last time, Without an Equal. It's a time when we're actually showing leadership and resilience and a lot of creativity. Because of censorship, we have to express ourselves and continue this work, sometimes in very creative forms. If not march, then we run. So for example, Justine is leading a running crew. We always say that. So thanks again for everybody who have shared super insightful observations and take on what's happening in your country. And I believe this short introduction will help the global audience to zoom into where you're at right now, and through the lens of 4 key countries in APAC region. So let's move on to our next question. Let's zoom in to this scene, I think more in a work context. So the first question would be that we often talk about cultural change and creating cultures of belonging. For many, this feels like quite an abstract concept. And we also know that belonging can be quite a subjective experience. And can you share a specific example of a time that you felt a true sense of belonging at work? And what factors were at play to create that outcome for you? So I would like to give this question first to Alexander to share with us a little bit more about your experience.
Thank you. It's a great question. And I have to be honest, working in a big international law firm, which is quite progressive and supportive, has been easy, and probably was my choice to be part of a major multinational firm like that, like Freshfields, that again supports and inspires. But I really, I don't want to give a corporate spiel here to promote the firm, because firm deserves, all the accolades for really being one of the leaders, I think, in difficult markets and in difficult times, supporting LGBT equality. And me personally, allowing multiple pro bono matters to be opened in supporting of various activities in LGBT rights, and for my work on LAN, again, in marriage equality and other areas. But I wanted to give you a couple of examples, because I think, one thing is a corporate approach, but very different is how people and, your colleagues, take you. And I think this is where it's really important to understand that corporate overall push for equality and understanding is actually received and inspired by people we work with. It wouldn't be shocking to everyone if I said, not everyone is on the same page on these issues. Many people might not have been or seen around LGBT people before, never heard of these issues, never thought of these issues. And I think the corporate environment, what it can and should do is to really allow the ability for discussion to happen, for discourse to occur. And I feel, again, very privileged that we have had this opportunity to begin marriage equality discussions, both externally, but also internally. And I wanted to give you a couple of examples. One was a very, junior colleague of mine, female. She got married. She's Japanese, and we work closely, and I really, adore her. And I said, look, sincere congratulations on a personal, professional level. Very happy for you. And I said, I wish, gay and lesbian couples could also marry here in Japan. And, there was a long pause. And the next day she came to my office and said to me, that's really unfair that the gays and lesbians can't marry. I never thought of this. It was given to me. Since then, she's been one of the most active supporters of the work we do at LAN. And someone I literally just had lunch the other day who again reiterated that, saying, Alexander, those words still stuck in my head. But while I can marry and enjoy this institute of marriage for the most part, you can't, and most other people can't here in Japan. And that inequality, especially for someone in legal profession, it does cut to the core. And another example, I had a discussion with a colleague who said, look, I'm concerned about the impact of marriage equality in Japan on kids. And, we hear this argument quite a lot, especially in Asia, because family is very, very important. And, the person said, look, I'm worried that if kids are raised by same-sex couples, they will be, they will have a difficult time in the community. And I said to her, look, your child is actually biracial, and your child probably faces quite a bit of stigma in a very homogeneous country like Japan. And I said, look, we as a society should be moving forward and expanding our horizons and not limiting them because we feel like someone might not receive as well. Again, this person became one of the strongest supporters and allies that I could think of. And I think sometimes you need to have those discussions on a personal level for people to really appreciate why we as a community strive for something that may be a given for others. I'll stop here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexander, for sharing with us about your experiences at work. I feel very moved actually by this example that you made an ally, out of a true and honest sharing, and also showing your vulnerability, and that was very moving to me. So thank you. So how about Chris? Can you also share with us about your take on this question from the perspective of Philippines?
I think today it's almost impolitic for any business organization to not say that they don't support diversity and inclusion, especially the LGBT plus community. I mean, definitely, if they do that, the internet will be coming for them. So it really makes smart, business sense, to start including the community. So we say that diversity is table stakes, like, diverse hiring, that's like, that's old news. That's not what we want anymore. The battleground really is inclusion and, really, fostering that sense of belongingness. And, every time I speak with like an MNC or an MSME, I have the same conversation. I ask them to do three things. And to make me feel and to make the LGBT community feel truly, really included. So it's not just, lip service. The first is to open the doors, like spread the welcome mat. Make sure that there are no barriers for employment, and then, training and then promotion for LGBT plus professionals. There should be no impediment whatsoever, for any kind of progression and advancement for the LGBT plus community. That means like breaking stereotypes, like, removing these restrictions, with regards to providing us with employment and these roles, because really the sky's the limit for the community. That should be the case. And the second is really setting the stage. And I translate this through policies and benefits in the workplace, like make it a beautiful, glorious stage for us to perform. Right? Codify, like don't just say that you protect LGBT professionals in your workplace. Show me the policies, and then show me the benefits. Give us the same benefits that you provide your cis hetero employees. That is inclusion. That is diversity in action. And finally, step away. And this is a very important call out to our allies. Your job is not to speak on our behalf, because I see a lot of corporate D&I programs where, the allies overtake the community. And I always remind them, hey, what is the program for? Who is the program for? So let's remember that. So open the door, set the stage, and when the time is right, step away so we can take the mic and be Beyonce, because that's all we want.
I agree with you, Chris. Thank you so much. I think you've talked about something that's quite interesting about giving the microphone back to the community. I think that kind of respect, as well as just holding that space, is actually what's very, very important for allies. And it's very, very important in the awareness and education that we're trying to build around it as well. So thank you for sharing some insight on that. Actually, I would like to have a little bit of an add-on question to both of you. Can you share with us one exact moment when you feel like wow, I really belong to this company, or I really belong to this team, as a member of this community? Like, can you recall? Like, it's okay if you don't have, but that maybe one moment, like you felt like you belong, and who are around you, what kind of setting was it? I think it will help us to look into this topic about belonging in a really personal way, if that's fine.
So to me, it's any moment that I am allowed to create my own table. I know that, the popular saying is that, oh, give us a seat at the table. But see, I don't want to just have a seat at the table. I want to be creating tables for myself. I want to be leading conversations. I don't just want to be at the receiving end of solutions. I want to be able to create solutions for my community. So that is really, always a true moment of inclusivity and belongingness for me. And that makes me feel seen and heard, recognized, and most importantly, valued.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. I feel empowered on the other end. Yeah, hearing this. Would you like to share with us? I think you have talked a little bit more about the really significant exchange you had with your Japanese colleague and her turning into an ally. Any other small stories you would like to share that made you feel like you truly belong to the team or the company or the environment surrounding you?
Sure, thank you. Look, I think I might not entirely agree with Chris on everything, to be honest. I think if you are part of a big corporate, I don't know if necessarily my sexuality needs to be part of the discussion all the time, or, I don't actually know, and I don't think that many gay people want to be Beyonce or want to be so active. In fact, I think the majority of LGBT community would prefer for that to be a non-issue. And you come to work and you do work, But what is important, and I agree that there is actually support from the organization on the organizational and individual level. And I wanted to answer a question with an example that is quite dear to me. And when I felt that a true belonging to Freshfields was the current leader of the firm, the first female leader of any Magic Circle law firm, Georgia Dawson, and I had this discussion a couple of years ago. She was based in Singapore, and she's actually quite involved in a lot of Singaporean issues as well. We talked about this issue and I said, look, you have my wholehearted support, from personal, professional levels. That is something that's, not everyone says and does, and it did translate in most recent example that the firm set actual percentage goals for a number of LGBT out partners that will be hopefully achieved in the next few years. That is something that feels you both inspiring and belonging. And I think this is important to me. Again, I don't really want to talk about my sexuality at work, to be entirely honest, but I do want that to be appreciated and that to be actually rewarded in the sense that appreciating that it's difficult, to be different, but the organization acknowledges this and helps you promote that. So that to me is a very important sense of belonging.
Thank you, Alexander. I think you have really given so many great points. And I think one key take I got away from it was this support to the community needs to happen at an individual level, and success and belonging actually to us is a very subjective experience. So that we need to be individually empowered to be the best version of ourselves, and that's enough, right? So others' definition of success and their good feeling might not be mine, and that's okay. And then they need to be giving us support individually, because everyone is worth it, right? So I think, truly, I think your sharing actually brought a very diverse perspective, together with Chris. And thank you both for this. So let's move on to the next question. I would like to give the microphone to Geraldine. And you're currently leading an APAC as an APAC regional inclusion and wellbeing project team lead. So my question to you is, what are some lessons that you have learned when customizing, your DEI initiative across countries from a regional point of view?
I must say this has been an incredible learning experience, and it continues to be. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is regional efforts must go hand in hand with local efforts. I'll give you some great examples about what we've seen success in from a regional and global perspective. And those are the ability to choose our pronouns in our internal communication Slack platform, our internal directory as well. Certain policies we have in place, anti-bullying and anti-harassment that's specific to LGBTQ community. So Chris, to your point about policy, I completely agree. So that's another thing. We have great success with regional ERGs as well. Fantastic programs, credits to our regional D&I team. We even have a belonging campaign whereby leaders across the globe actually pledge to the importance of feeling belong, particularly towards this community. And those are fantastic and crucial initiatives that we need from a regional and global level. But the localization is where it truly impacts individuals' lives, like what my previous speakers and Alexis, you mentioned as well, is the individual experience. And the truth is, this is very different in different countries, right? I'll give you an example, and big credits to our benefits team as well. So in Singapore, we know that it's not recognized. Marriage equality is non-existent here. So that means when it comes to insurance policy, if I cannot have my partner of the same sex to be covered in my personal insurance as a dependent, yeah. However, in Oracle, we managed to work with our insurance broker to navigate through this so-called challenge. And from a corporate point of view, our insurance coverage can cover my partner or any of our employees, partner of the same sex as a dependent, and not just in terms of insurance policy, but also in terms of flexible benefits as well. So this is one great example about customization. And I think before the recent times, it's easy for people to, I mean, even currently, it's easy for people to dismiss the possibility just because it's part of the country's law. But we never realized that, hey, we can do it if we just ask some questions and to the right people as well. Yeah, so that's one example of localization. Another one that I think is worth mentioning is probably one that's dear to a lot of people, especially in the last 18 months, which is mental health. Okay, because we're talking about inclusion, and that's one big focus for our team as well. And I think I can say, apart from Australia and New Zealand, other countries in this region really struggle to bring this into conversations, into discussions, because it's a stigma, it's a taboo if you have any mental health condition. And it can vary, the stigma varies across the region from someone having a mental health condition being a CEO of a company to someone being locked out in a room at home because their family don't want them to be seen or their family is embarrassed by them. So how do we have a regional mandate to encompass all these differences? We can't. So that's where the regional and global efforts have to be met with the local efforts as well. So that's why currently we are also working on specific countries to see how we can address the mental health environment. And our benefits program also, kudos to the team, also includes benefits or rather flexible coverage and insurance coverage for people with this condition. So yeah, I think my time is up, but I hope it gives you a sense about the amazing learnings and efforts we're putting in behind the scenes here.
Thank you, Geraldine. I think in such a brief time, you have shared with us many best practices and the angle of tackling it from a regional level. So thank you so much. So next, I would like to give the microphone to Justine. And my question for you is, similarly, do you have any advice for our audience members who work at the headquarters actually located outside of the region? So currently you're based in China, right? So from your experience, any advice for them, working with local and regional teams in executing the HQ vision, right? But then how do we put this really more in a more locally relevant or regionally relevant context? What was your experience like and your advice to this relationship for them?
Yeah, thank you, Alexis. I think the most important question for HQ to ask themselves is really, how can we set them up for success? So how can we set our local regional counterparts up for success? Obviously, a very important thing to keep in mind here is the local culture and the context they're operating with. But beyond just doing lip service, but how do we integrate that home behavior in a local operating environment, understanding exactly what resources they can deploy? Because obviously not every region or local subsidiary will have the same asset that you have. And in defining this role that HQ plays in bringing that vision to life, is the HQ a consultancy, an adversary, or a mentor figure, or just another example? Because there will always be strategic tension between HQ and regional and local. But how active is HQ in directing and leading this CNI strategy? And the right answer here is probably not that active and not that hands-on, but more of setting up the framework, setting them up for success. So a very good learning from my experience is that the greatest contributions HQ can have to their regional and local counterparts are two things. And first, it's this framework. So setting up the methodology and the way of working that's been created thus far. And number two is the previous success and failure stories. So folks can take a page from that book and adopt it and shape it in their own way. Because when this has been set up, it's a lot easier for local to take a page from that and then adopt it in their own style and their way that really works locally. And I also like to bring attention back to the regional and local folks here. It's very important for us actually to take initiative to represent the environment that we're with and inform the HQ back up to educate them on the context, because we know best of what the people are like, what the culture is like, what really works, right? So thereby we can influence up and create a bottoms up approach, because what you really don't want is for one side to keep funneling their idea and their vision, what has worked, but for the other side to be very push and pull on that. And so when HQ vision looks awkward or ill-fitting, it's up to the regional folks to kind of make that work, because they know the region best and they know what works and what doesn't. So it's almost like if global or HQ is giving a menu and it's not a set menu, it's very a la carte, right? So what works, what is something that we can be inspired by, but it doesn't mean that it's just a downloading onto the local folks.
Thank you so much, Justine. I think you've mentioned some really great points about how to work this relationship, especially for countries that have quite drastic cultural differences. Like you and I work in China right now, and we see how downloading, let's say, US-centric practices could sometimes be just impractical, right? In the context where the cultural difference is quite drastic. So I think you mentioned about trust and autonomy, right? But also providing that framework support, so then people have a great foundation to leverage their power on and to get things started. Right.
Yeah, and if I can add on something that the HQ folks can think about is, what is the minimum viable product here? So it's great that HQ might have a lot of resources, asset at their disposal, but when we translate that into a region that probably doesn't have as much resources, what is the MVP here? What are the most key things that you want to be able to create, and what's the output? And that's not just about HQ, regional, local, but even when we're thinking about it in Shanghai, then something might operate differently in Guangzhou, just even in another city within China. So we always have to think, what is the best product we can produce with the minimum effort? Like, what is the priority objective that we want to deliver here?
Right. Yeah, really, really great points. Thank you, Justine, for your sharing on this. I believe later we might have some other opportunities to come back to this question. I believe all the panelists here have a lot to say, right, in this work that we do. So next question, I think I'd like to zoom in a little bit more on the solutions. And this question actually is for all of you to respond. So that we know that the APAC region is not monolithic, and it's full of diversity and many different kind of landscapes. So, however, like we are all building actually towards similar goals as well, even though we have a lot of diversity in this region towards greater inclusion. And although sometimes cross-country collaboration is not always easy, however, do you see any opportunities for companies from different countries or different locations to come together to further this collaboration towards a greater inclusion? I think that could also mean not only countries, but for example, different cities and different region in your country as well. When do you see we can really come together? What should be really this shared inclusion goals that we could share? So let me give the microphone first to back to Alexander. What's your take on this?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, how can we help each other? Allow me to give you 3 examples, which I think would be inspiring in a way, because I do think, as Chris opened up earlier, to say we can and should inspire each other, and we have. So if you look at the example of Taiwan, our neighbor here from Japan, that has marriage equality, that was a major, achievement for Asia, because again, for many years, that seemed like a Western concept, that gays and lesbians can marry, somewhere in Europe, or US, Canada, and a few other English-speaking countries. But when it comes to Asia, it's a very different discussion. And critically, the way to achieve it was to really apply the elements which were just mentioned by Justine, the localized elements. You're not talking about the same arguments pro marriage equality that were made before courts in Canada and US. You actually talk about harmony of society, and that excluding people of LGBT orientation from the marriage institution is actually deharmonizes the society. The other element was the family unity. We want the family to be together, and not excluding anyone from the family, whether it's family unit or society, locally or regionally. Those things that were achieved in Taiwan, and critically, that the sky hasn't fallen. There are many, many happy couples in Taiwan, and hopefully there'll be many more across Asia. My second example I wanted to give you is Hong Kong. Hong Kong has given us some, competitive thinking, because Hong Kong courts have been very supportive of various LGBT rights, not just the marriage equality, but immigration. We've struggled here in Japan to bring people from across the world, really, because if you're a same-sex married couple, you might not have been able to get a visa for your spouse. In many cases, people would come to Japan as as a student of Japanese language, or have to do your own visa, etc. Very, very difficult, actually, especially for senior roles. And I know that some senior roles where people just I don't want to be necessarily in the classroom pretending that I'm a student just because I want to be with my husband or wife in Japan. That has changed. Actually, when Hong Kong has changed its policy, I think it was a big situation and discussion here in Japan that we're losing the cutting edge to Hong Kong, that a lot of the executives and senior people will be moving there and not here. My last example I wanted to give you, it's something we have done to inspire the region, I believe. I mentioned earlier the viewpoint on marriage equality, something we worked for the last 3 years with the corporates and chambers of commerce here in Japan, to pass the marriage equality and have it endorsed by multiple companies, domestic and international. The beauty of this, it's a business case for marriage, actually is universal. If it's good for business in Japan, for couples to be able to have equal access to marriage, it's going to be the same thing across all jurisdictions we're discussing today. So that message actually does translate internationally. It actually came from the US when there was an amicus brief before the US Supreme Court by corporates to say that we believe in equal marriage for our employees, but actually for the society. And I've seen now that Hong Kong is following our example with the similar concept in Hong Kong being made, but where the business case for marriage is introduced. And I can tell you, it makes actually a difference. The Sapporo Court decision, which was supportive of marriage equality here in Japan, specifically referenced that there is a viewpoint and there is a business case for marriage articulated by many, many companies. Again, I think that will be something that we can use, all of us together, and especially the same companies who have endorsed it here should be able to take the same stance elsewhere. So happy to inspire and be inspired.
Thank you, Alexander. I think this really echoes back to what Justine said, that we need to share what we collectively and continuously are learning together with one another, the successes and the failures, and take inspirations from one another, especially now I think we really live in this global village when communication, a lot of them are even happening just online. We're working online together. I think this swift collaboration is more possible than ever as well. So thank you, Alexander, for bringing us a lot of very specific, really expert insights into where you're at. And let's give the microphone to Chris, back to Chris, on this same question.
Everything that Alexander said, 100% in agreement. I think when you think about cross-country collaboration within Asia, I know it feels like a pipe dream for now, but when you look at it, all these movements that are happening across Asia, they're all adding up to something. And call me optimistic, but these changes, no matter how incremental, they're all adding up to something huge. And I have a feeling that at some point, like, our governments, the intergovernmental bodies will start to pay attention. These movements that are happening in Thailand and Taiwan and Japan, we're all taking notes. We're looking at your playbooks. We're proudly stealing your best practices, and so we're really marching to the same beat. At the same, so that's really fantastic. I think it's time for us to retire the notion that Asian culture is homophobic. It's not. When you look at Asian cultures, yes, it's complex, it's complicated, it's diverse, but what unifies us is our respect for harmony, for togetherness, for family. And these are at the very core of our arguments, for equality, for LGBT plus equality and across the region. So I think that all of us are, as you said earlier, Alexis, headed towards the same direction, maybe on a different space and on a different pace, but we're all getting there, and we are, being moved and guided by each other.
Thank you, Chris. I believe you actually mentioned one really important insight. I personally hope that we can mention this panel is that Asia Pacific is not all like backwards in many people's eyes, that we're not just following the same meter, right, but just backwards. In fact, we have a lot of rich cultural heritage and different perspectives on things, and even cultural assets. I think that could bring to this discussion about inclusion to the global table. I believe we have a lot to say. And I think what you have said just really helped me to articulate that out. So thank you so much. And I believe, it's also really important for us to be empowered that way as Asians, right, in this region. So on this table of a global discussion about inclusion. And I think it's not that we're all backwards, we're different, and the approach and pace would be different, but still at the core, we're just humans, right? And there's so much universal things that we share. Right. So thank you so much for your sharing. I personally also learned a lot from that. And let's give the microphone to Geraldine. So can you also share with us your thoughts about on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so really impressed by Alexander and Chris's response. It's just amazing. And I agree that regional efforts, learning the best practices from each other, especially on the macro level, when it comes to legislations, when it comes to best practices for MNCs or corporations, I think there's lots of things to learn. In fact, for Oracle, it is our Japanese chapter that took the lead in terms of open chapter. So the Pride ERG is called Open in Oracle, just for everyone's understanding. And from there, Singapore came up. After that, Philippines, and then India and Taiwan. So we really look to our Japanese colleagues in that area. I'd like to really emphasize on this term called GLOCAL. You probably heard of it. Yeah, and I think also to Justine's point as well, like we take framework and guidelines and best practices from US, where our headquarters is, or from our regional team as well when it comes to D&I teams. But we must have people locally to make the best sense out of it. And for those who may not be familiar with this term GLOCAL, look at McDonald's, look at IKEA, look at Starbucks. Do you know that in Singapore, McDonald's, we actually have a Hainanese chicken rice burger? So it's so successful, it's crazy, like it got sold out and everything, and that's because they cater to the local taste. And why aren't we using this concept when it comes to creating an inclusive environment that truly makes sense to each country? So while we learn from each other on a regional level, I love to learn from fellow like fellow peers from other companies in Singapore, because they face the challenge that we do in Oracle Singapore. So hopefully we can come to a success at globalizing our best practices here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. I think you have said the most important thesis for this call. Let's go global. Let's all go global. Yeah, I think that really summarizes this very, very well about what can really set up, the success in this region, globally speaking too. So last, let's give the microphone to Justine. Can you share with us your perspectives from China on this question?
Yeah, definitely. I think I can't stress enough the value of intra-company networking. I feel very lucky to be working in an MNC that offers a lot of opportunities to network and liaise with other offices. So it's very important to take advantage of those opportunities, and so we can all move together as opposed to separately. I mean, it's important that we're all working towards the same goal, but we are all the more stronger when we're working together as one unit. And I always think that there are no, even within a big company, there are no department walls that cannot be knocked down with an email. With an email, with a phone call, if you need something, if you need a best practice, share it, ask it. And this is something that luckily I'm in this situation to be able to do that. But I think for folks that are maybe in smaller, more regional, more local companies that maybe don't have a huge global network, again, it's easier to take advantage of situations on LinkedIn, on your personal networks, to just tap on people that you know that maybe can offer you some sort of ideas just as inspiration. So this is my take on the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Justine, for your sharing. So I'd like to follow up actually with another question I think would be really relevant to anyone who are watching from especially your region where you locate. So I would like everybody to share about maybe your advice on the first steps for anyone who would like to start this inclusion work, and how should they prioritize? What are the first steps that they should take if whether they're in a company that have nothing or just have a very, very really just in the beginning stage of this work? Can you give us some quick tips about where would be the best place to start?
Yeah, I have two things I think will be very helpful, especially in a company that just started a D&I journey, D&I inclusion. It might be kind of scary to tackle this issue or to put it on anyone's agenda. But I think, and even with other queer folks in the community, they might not be so willing to kind of take a stand. It's a scary thing to come out at workplace. I think we all know that. But I think what we can do is ask them to come out as allies. So to gain allyship and to encourage allies to come out, you don't need to say that you're queer. Just say that you're supportive of your queer allies. I mean, your queer folks at work. That's all we can. That's all we're asking. And I think it's just these like little nudge that we can add. We can kind of push people to do. So you don't have to wear a rainbow sticker, but you can wear an ally one. That's just taking little steps that we can do. Another one I think is don't be afraid to just ask for things. And I think working from community efforts, we've learned that asking is free. So if you just open your mouth, ask for something, and the bigger the ask, the bigger your outcome may be. So go to the influence up. Go to the decision makers, go to the stakeholders and ask them to add D&I into the agenda. It doesn't hurt for them to add that. At the very least, now it's on their radar to have allyship in the agenda and to prioritize that into something. So it could trickle down. I think it's harder to mobilize people at your level to come out to take a stand, but if you influence one person at the top, that can trickle down and have a ripple effect.
Thank you, Justine. Yeah, especially in a country like China, for example, like seniority, right? How hierarchy works. In fact, like it's proven more and more in what's I think the companies have real successes here that the leadership needs to be involved, right? So talk to the leadership, right? And see, right? And sometimes it's just one email and one honest conversation away from kickstarting something, right? That could really yield you real outcomes. So thank you, Justine, for your perspectives. So how about Geraldine? Would you mind to give us from maybe the Singaporeans, from a Singapore perspective, right? On like if people want to start like real inclusion work and start on
Yeah.
these goals, towards these goals, where should they start? Maybe just a few advice for them.
Yeah, I can think of two things as well. Firstly, I think we need to be aware of our current policies. It could be government policies as well as company policy. It's easy in Singapore when you're trying to advocate for something and then the public will go like, oh, but it's illegal. If it's illegal means it's wrong, right? But if you're prepared for that kind of conversation, then it really makes a big difference. But on a corporate level, if there are policies that stands firm in protecting the interests of LGBTQ community, that's a stance that the corporate is making. So be aware of what we have, policies and benefits even. The second one would be to cut out all the noise, basically. So I'll share a bit about my experience, basically starting up the ERG in Singapore. So I was told that it was tried before, but it was shut down. Just because they take reference from the government, right? It's illegal, so we can't do anything of such sensitive nature in the company. So, but later I realized that all I had to do was talk to the right people, such as our employment legal personnel based in Australia, but he's taking care of the region. And he dug a bit deeper. Just cause it's not legal externally doesn't mean we can't create a community within the company in the four walls, that's fine, and yeah, so basically cut out the noise, because there will always be naysayers and people who just want to take the easier way out, because any change we want to make is going to be inconvenient for some people. Yeah, so just be selective, take what you think will work for you, and just ignore the things that you feel that are obstacles, unnecessary obstacles. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Right. So I'm learning so much from this discussion as well, but unfortunately, we only have 1 hour in total for this call. So now we have to move into the final questions to close this panel. So I'd like to give everybody just 1 minute. Let's try to keep this brief, but can you share with us, in the context that we are now talking about sweeping structure and cultural change, but really looking into future and creating this vision for future. What is something tangible you wish that all of us could just do tomorrow to advance towards this common goal that we share? Maybe just one thing that all of us should start doing tomorrow. Yeah,
sure. Maybe to all the D&I leaders and all the advocates and activists, who are joining us today, just one reminder: whatever you do, remember who you're doing it for. It's for the community. So never ever remove them from the equation, because they are the reason why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Chris. That's super, super important. Alexander?
Agreed. I also wanted to say that we want to sound so positive and optimistic, but we also need to be honest. We live at a time of pandemic, and it has been hard for the community. Countries closed up. Individuals become more introverted, and I think it particularly impacts the mental health, but actually, overall progress for our community. So one thing that I was hoping we can all do is to remember that the work that we do is very important. It does make a difference, and it makes difference in individual lives. And as Chris says, don't forget whom we're doing it for, but actually, it is really more than just the rights. I think that many times, especially like now when there's such a challenge, structural, we need to support each other and find the ways to do it through individual and corporate ways. That would be the best. Open your hearts, open your minds, because it's so easy to close it now, but try to reach out and support each other.
Thank you, Alexander. And Justine?
Something that we can do tomorrow: start connecting with your HQ counterpart, your cross-office counterparts, grow your personal network so you become armed, empowered, and you gain more support and influence along the way. I think that's very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you, Justine. And Geraldine?
Yep. I guess one thing I think we can all do tomorrow, or even today, is to just be mindful about our personal brand. Right? If we're trying to advocate change, people will look to you and go like, you're not someone I want to listen to, right? if we want to advocate for change in terms of inclusion, are you inclusive as a person, right? The conversation that you're making, and we're all human beings. It's okay to acknowledge that sometimes we make mistakes in our language, but more importantly, let's be aware and let's be thoughtful, yeah, in this journey. Thank you.
Fantastic insight from you. Thank you. So now let's officially close this panel. And I would like to just thank everybody for bringing us such great insights from your region and from your personal stories and successes. And thank you so much for joining this call, to the audience as well. We hope that you have taken some real useful insights with you away from attending this call. So thank you. And we look forward to connect with you maybe in some other calls. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.